Creating tight-fitting dado joints like this can be an art, but it can also be a bit frustrating. A nice tight fit like this creates to a really strong joint and shows a bit of professionalism in your project. And this is used in many projects, to cabinets and spice racks and things like that. My name is Jim Heavey, and I'm here to show you how to do one of these using a dado system that will make perfect joints just like this every time. The trick is to cut this dado joint precisely. What you want to do is have a joint that fits together well by hand, that you don't have to force it, but at the same time is in there strong enough so that it doesn't fall out if you turn it over. And the way to do that is using a dado set. And before we go even into dado sets, there was a way to do this a long time ago by just using a regular straight table saw blade. It meant multiple passes over the blade to create a groove wide enough to be able to put that board in there. The problem with that is those multiple passes were never terribly accurate. The bottom was very irregular and very scalloped and never left much of a good glue joint. For those looking for a little excitement, they had a thing called a Wobble Blade a long time ago. And what it did was it used an off-center arbor to actually wobble that blade as it cut, and you dialed the amount of wobble to give you the width. The problem was it didn't always leave a nice sharp edge, and it had a slightly arched bottom which didn't look good from the side. The way most people do it today is by using a stacked dado set, and I've got those here. We have an outer blade and inner blade. You take the outer blade and the inner blade, add a few chippers, and then add a shim or two to kind of make up for that distance. The problem was, though it worked very well, it was very time consuming. You'd put all these components together, try a test cut, and find out it was a little too loose or too tight. Take the arbor nut off, take the washer off, take the outer blade off, maybe a chipper or two, put a couple of shims in, repeat the process, do it again, and now maybe this time you're the opposite. So though it worked, it took an awful lot of time. There's a new blade, a very unique blade, that does all of this, and it does it very well. And that is Freud's dial-a-width dado. In effect, it uses the same inner and outer blades. It uses the same chippers, but instead of having a bunch of shims, it's got a gauge or a dial on the front that allows you to dial in exactly the amount of shim that you need to make for the most perfect groove. Let me show you a little bit more about how this works. Now, the heart of this dial-a-width dado is actually in the adjustment. We still have the outside rings. We still have the chippers. But remember, we've eliminated some of the shims. And the idea is, all I'm going to do to make up for the shims is dial this ring on the outside. Now, it's set up that every click that I dial it is a 4,000th of an inch. A lot easier than using some of those shims. So every time I do it, I'm actually forcing this blade away from the other blades. When they sit in the saw, the blades actually mesh so that the teeth line up against each other, which also makes this the smallest, actually below a 1/4 of an inch dado we can do with this blade. And the idea is turning that inside ring actually forces those two blades apart with whatever chippers you have in there acting like a shim. So what I want to do is show that as I turn that, I'm actually going to take this little inside ring and I'm going to make it expand above the edge of this flat plate. And what it'll do is it'll take those two blades and it'll actually move them together, in effect operating like a shim. So we're starting with it even here, and as I turn it, you'll notice that the square starts to move, which means that center plate is higher. And every time I do this little click, I get a 4,000th of an inch. So what I've done now is I've separated the bottom edge of that square from the face of this, which means those blades have moved apart. That's the shim action. Actually works really well. The blade cuts a beautiful flat-bottomed hole, very even with no scoring. It also leaves little bat ears at the bottom, these little angled cuts at the very bottom. Because the joint fits so well, the glue has to have some place to go. And this little edge allows that glue to expand into it. So not only do you get a flat-bottomed, clean hole with a nice clean fit at the bottom, but you're also going to get a nice clean surface at the top because of the way these teeth are ground. It's an excellent system, works very well. I want to put it in the saw and show you how easy it is to dial exactly the right width of dado you want. So let's do a little review as long as we're standing behind the table saw. You're going to see a couple of things that are a little bit different here. The first is this insert. This is not your standard insert. This particular one is set up for a dado blade. You can see it's wider here than your normal blade, and we need that doing this operation. Second thing is there's no blade guard on here. There's also no splitter on the back because there's no way that we can use either of those things in doing this operation. So just practice a lot of care when you're doing these because you're without some of those guards. It goes without saying that I'll be using hearing protection and eye protection as I always would. And there's a couple of things that I want to review as we just start this to make this whole process go a little bit easier. the stock that I'm planning on using, be it solid wood or plywood, I want to kind of get a feel for how thick this is, because that's going to tell me how many of these chippers and blades to set up originally. I've got a small, very inexpensive little gauge here that's just going to show me that this particular board is a little bit stronger than 3/4 of an inch, so it's a little bit thicker than that. If I use plywood, it'd be a little bit less. And the reason I'm looking at that is I want to go to the little brochure that's sent with your blade, and it tells me with 3/4, I need the 2 outside blades, which you're going to use with any operation, and I need 4 of the chippers set up in that order. So those whole sets will go in as one group and then be adjusted to match that final thickness. So let me show you as we go from one step to the other. The first is I'm going to take the inside blade. This one has got a washer on the inside here, and it actually matches the washer that's on the arbor of your saw. There's no reason to remove that arbor. So we'll slide this in first, and it fits right over the outside edge. And then each one of these little chippers goes in, and I said there would have to be 4 of them. And I want to make sure that they're at 90 degrees to each other so that the blades kind of overlay one another. And just take a second to slide all 4 of these in. There's number 2. It's important that they be at 90 degrees because you don't want any of these little tips touching another one, because it'll give you a false reading of its thickness and could damage the cutting edges. And here is our last chipper. And again, they mesh pretty well without any tip touching another. And then finally, your outside. And now we'll just put the nut on. And before I firm this up, I just want to make sure that all these little tooth edges are away from the tooth next to them. And it looks like they are. And now we'll just tighten this. Lower our blade again. And put our 0 clearance back. And I want to raise this just to make sure that our blade spins free of that insert. And so we are ready to make a cut. So I put my dado blade back down on the table, and what I want to do now is raise it to make this cut. I've been using this the whole time to try and figure out how wide a cut we want to have, and the material I'm putting it into is this one. So the same thickness. The idea is I want to cut a dado in here about 1/3 the thickness of the material. So if this is 3/4, I want to come up about 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to use a folding rule with a little slide on it and bring my blade up so that I'm actually 1/4 of an inch. So my blade is set in there. All right, it's time to make our cut. And you can see in the front here, this is a really smooth cut. A very clean bottom edge, very clean little side pieces. Made very little noise when I was cutting it too. Just a very nice clean cut. And the interesting part is that it's exactly the same on the back side. And now it's time to test the fit. And as I put these together, you'll see we are just a little bit too tight. This piece is just a little bit fat for the opening, so I've made an opening that's just not quite right. But it makes it really easy to make that adjustment, and every time you do one of these in your test fits, you'll finally get to a point where it's adjusted perfectly, and then you can finish the entire project. Let me show you how to make that dado just a hair wider. It's so much easier with this blade combination. All I'm going to do is I'm going to back this nut off just a bit so it's loose. And taking the dial on the front, and remember that's 1/4000th of an inch every time you move it, I'm going to adjust it just a bit in, and I'll run it to 2 clicks maybe. And let's just see how we do with that. And again, tighten this back up. So in effect, what I've done is I've taken that blade and I've moved those 2 outside blades apart, much like I'd be putting in a shim, and retest that cut. And I'll do that as often as I need to until the one piece fits into the other and you get a perfect dado. That's how to use this. It couldn't be simpler. And this is our assembled project. And you can see these dado joints are absolutely perfect. Very clean, very professional looking, and all due to Freud's adjust-to-width dado. You probably never thought doing something like this was easy. It is.